that chorus comes back, feel free to join in. Throw open the closet, shake the skeletons out, and reclaim each bone, each bit of yourself. Reach through the cobwebs, get dust on your hands. Go on, try again, they will understand. You've come a long, long way. 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 Thank you. Thank you.
I got to see John the first time at a workshop at a convention up Big Sky, Montana. And I was thrilled to have him come today and share the message with us. So without further ado, I am going to have him come up and share the beautiful message with the rest of us.
Thank you, Wendy. Well, I thought it was time that I check in with you all. There's been a lot that's happened since we last seen each other, and some of you maybe new, have not seen me before, but I think the last time I spoke at your center was about 6.5, 7 years ago. So a lot of things have changed. A lot of things have changed for me as well as you. And as Wendy said, I am the minister at Light on the Mountain Center Spiritual Living in Sun Valley, Idaho, and I have been so for about 17 years. And it's gone by like that. And people, when they look at us, and I think we have a really nice thing going, we talk about building community. But it's more about, as we build community, about a constant letting go. And we don't often see that in communities, that we try to hold on sometimes to what we've been, what we were, what we think we should be, and we think about what we want to grow, but we neglect to think about what it is that we need to let go. And it's really important as spiritual communities to do that, especially long-term spiritual communities. As we have been, we just celebrated our 32nd year as a center, and you guys have been around longer. How many? Yeah, it's about 50 years. So there's a big breadth of history, and it's really easy to think back to that and think sometimes the good old days or the really terrible times sometimes, and not to be in the present moment. So what I have found is that it is important to be in inner discernment on a regular basis, to ask yourselves, why are you here? Right now we do that annually at Light in the Mountains. We are having our stewardship program. Now, stewardship programs on the surface, people think are about raising money, and they're not. They're about, why would you raise money? Why would we contribute to a spiritual center or faith community when we could do any number of things with our money? And that's a difficult question sometimes for us in New Thought, because we have trouble putting together an idea of that we have a we that we are sharing together, that we have a true purpose that unites us, even though we are individuals as well. That we just have trouble coming up with that thing of why we are here in the world. Unlike, I'm sure many of you, as me, were raised in some sort of Christian denomination. Doesn't matter the denomination in Christianity, there is a real, clear, singular purpose within Christianity, which usually involves around salvation. We don't have that. In fact, we are really individualist here, and I don't think we often play well with others. We don't really know how to be together. So here's an interesting fact. So if you ask a clergy person who is a minister in a Christian organization or a Jewish rabbi, and you say, how many members do you have? They will tell you how many family units are in their congregation. When you ask a new thought center, they will tell you how many individuals are in their congregation. So there is a natural thing of looking for a we that I think sometimes we struggle with. And it's so interesting during the year. So I came into Science of Mind in the mid-1990s. And of course, first as a layperson, then experiencing Science of Mind as a practitioner, and then now as a minister for, next year will be my 20th year as being a minister. And over the years, I'm sure as you see people come and you see people go. And I've seen people who have come into it that have been so excited about the teaching and just wanting to be involved, and things are amazing and their life is changing, and then suddenly they disappear. And sometimes I run into them in the supermarket, especially now. I live in a small town. And the supermarket is where you get all the good info, where I live. And I'll say, well, gee, what happened? Where'd you go? He says, well, I feel I got what I needed and I'm healed and I didn't need to come anymore. Again, we have a tendency to take what we need for us and don't realize that there's still more work to be done in the community. In fact, a few years ago, I had someone tell me who would become I guess they call it now ghosting. They disappear on you. And I said, well, gee, what happened? I said, well, I'm just not getting spiritually fed anymore. And I said, well, and this was after 15, 20 years being involved. I said, well, then maybe it's time for you to do some of the feeding. And in Science of Mind, we often don't think of that. We think that we have gotten what we need, and now it's time to move on. So the question is, as we are doing our discernment on a yearly basis at Light of the Mountains, is to ask, why are we here? What is our purpose in the world? What have we come together as a community to really stand for and take out into the world? That we all have some sort of vision statement that includes making the world a better place, but what does that really mean beyond just having a nice phrase to share with everyone? How do you each individually intend, and as groups, to make the world a better place? And the way that we figure that out is through discernment. Mindy kind of gave a spoiler alert that I'm talking about time in the desert today. And it's interesting how I liked how she set it up for us. It seems like when you are wandering metaphorically in the desert, that not much is happening. In fact, usually what's on the foremost of your mind is, when can I get out of the desert? When can I find a lemonade stand or something? I'm really tired of this desert sort of living here. But actually, what seems to be a wandering is the deepest time that you can spend with yourself and as a group. And as you are going through transitions right now, you are in a big desert moment. And I don't mean that in the negative. I mean that as it is a time of amazing and incredible opportunity. So let's talk about the metaphor of the desert a little bit. So there are two major desert happenings in the Old and New Testament of the Bible, and there's desert happenings in faith traditions all out through the world. But let's talk about what we know a bit. So in the Old Testament, there is the story of Moses and 3 million people being lost in the desert for 40 years. And in the New Testament, there is the story of Jesus being in the desert for 40 days and 40 nights. So let me tell you about the symbolic meaning of that. The word 40. It doesn't mean that you actually spend a amount of 40 in the desert. 40 means simply this: as long as it takes. Now that's really it. As long as it takes. As you're trying to kind of negotiate your way out of the desert, we keep telling ourselves, haven't we been here long enough? Haven't we walked long enough? How can I, again, bargain my way out of this? It has actually maybe been literally a 40-something. And when it hasn't, you have to remember that, again, it is as long as it takes. So wherever you are right now, or where you feel you are as a congregation, and you feel great, and you feel enlivened, and you feel frustrated, and you don't know where you're going sometimes, you are in that moment of it as long as it takes. And there are certain things that you need to get over. We all need to get over when we are in these times. So if you go back to the Moses story, it's so interesting. He said 40 years, my gosh. So I Googled it. How long would it take to walk from Egypt to Israel? And it said like 7 days. I thought, talk about being lost. I mean, really, 40 years, it's like it's supposed to take like 7 days of walking? I mean, it seems like you would almost have to be lost on purpose for that. But the whole point is, again, it is as long as it takes. But the larger idea and metaphor for that being lost in the desert story was this. 40 years is about the time of a generation of human beings, meaning that before they could get to where they needed to go, everyone who started the journey had to have passed or had died. Meaning you couldn't, in a sense, enter a promised land until everything that came before was gone. That's why it took 40 years, in a sense. Everything that had been held onto, everything that they thought was dear or should have been before, had been lost, forgotten, and died out before a new way of being could happen. So that's some of the deep work that we have in what we call the walk in the desert. But there's some nuances there. And I looked at the story of Jesus lost in the desert. And first, and just to remind you, any story in sacred scriptures, regardless whether it's Christianity, Judaism, Hinduism, they are not necessarily about other people, they are about you. So if you really want to spend time with any story, sacred story from any denomination, you imagine yourself as each character one at a time, what was their experience and how their experience is your experience. And if you were really having trouble, you could spend days on just one story and be each character and ask yourself, how am I being challenged? What am I being asked to grow here? It's not about reading stories about other people. So when we read about the story of Jesus being in the desert for 40 days and 40 nights, it is your story. It is about your inner discernment. It is about what happens in our mind as we seemingly are lost. And so in this story, we are told that Jesus had 3 temptations. But I look at it a little bit differently. I see it as having what I call mesmerized by 3 false beliefs. And if you're really walking and you're really wanting to get out of something, isn't it interesting how your mind plays tricks on you? How you start to bargain or try to get out of your situation. And this is what happens in the desert. Again, how can I shorten this experience a little bit? So the first false belief that came up after this 40-day and 40-night fasting for him was simply this thought, of course, first of all, after 40 days and 40 nights of fasting, you're pretty hungry. And just about anything is starting to look good. So the idea in his mind was certainly, boy, if you are so powerful, why don't you just turn these rocks into bread and get over the fast? So the deeper meaning to this is simply this. When you are in the desert, what is it that you are consuming? In your lives right now, what are you consuming? What are you taking in? What words are coming out of your mouth? Are you almost like a wind-up doll when you see certain things on TV or anywhere else that you just go off? What are you consuming? What are you sharing? Here's a good way to figure it out. Turn on the news of the station that you prefer not to watch. And I don't care which one it is. I'm sure there's a mixture here. Turn on the station that just works your last nerve. Get to the point that you think that you would like to throw your shoe at the TV set. And then stop and ask yourself, what are you consuming? Now, no one made you consume in that moment. Someone served it up for you, but you had to do the eating. And how did that change the rest of your day? How were you just seething with whatever it is that you heard on that news program, and you had to go and talk to your best friend who would agree with you about how terrible that was? And then, when you saw someone in the public, in the mall, or whatever, that represented in your mind that idea or consciousness that made you so upset on the news, you saw them, and just imagine how you have just put your anger out at that person and judgment at that person. So that meal that you consumed from a few minutes of television have really set the course of your whole day. So in the desert, the invitation is to stop that. To stop these stories that you are telling yourself in your mind. To stop these things that we call the monkey mind of things, of the conversations that we have with people over and over again in our mind. That if you want to get to your next level of being, you have to quiet the mind. You have to really discern what is it that you are consuming and sharing with everyone with whom you come in contact with. As a spiritual community, what stories are you telling about yourself? To each other, to everyone else. And not just the nice stories that we like to tell about ourselves, but what is the story of yourself as a 50-year community that you tell to each other? What are sometimes you think as the big hurts you may have experienced that you take them in so much that the new person that comes in the door instantly gets inoculated with that story of how terrible it was at some time? What is your story? In the desert, you were invited to let go of your story and to start to think what might be your new one. So the second false belief in the desert, very simply within Jesus saying, gosh, you're an enlightened being. You could just jump off the top of this cathedral and the angels would catch you. You are so special. Why don't you just do it and be done with this desert thing and get on with it? So what does this have to tell us as we are in discernment? The temptation here of false belief is to put more into our smaller self than ourself as an unlimited being and group of people. That the temptation here is to say that our ego is truly who we are. Now, we live in a place of time and space, and in one sense, we need an ego. Our ego tells us that today would not be a good day to wear flip-flops and shorts. Our egos told me how I could get here from Sun Valley, Idaho to Salt Lake City. There is a definite reason to have that sense of boundaries in where we live. But we can take it too far and come to believe that that actually is who we are. That we forget that we are unlimited beings and we start to tell ourselves that we are these finite beings. And we do that in spiritual community sometimes as well. Again, we get back into our story. We get into how things used to be or should be. And we just focus on that so much. And we forget why we're really here. But more importantly, especially in spiritual community, we go to kind of this last little bit that Jesus faced, that this idea of needing something to complete yourself. So the third false belief was, look everything out there. That can just be yours for the having, but in a sort of an egotistical way. And the inference there was, you need to have a certain condition before you can experience your unlimited self. So how many times do we say that we have this great idea who we are as a people or a family or an individual, and it will happen when I finally have enough money, that I've met the right people, then I've had the right circumstances. And we always hold ourselves back just a little bit because we check our bank account and say, well, I really can't do this yet because. That I can't live up to this vision that we have, this vision which is amazing. We have to put it on hold till the right circumstances show up. And this happens in the spiritual community all the time. We have a great vision, but we don't have enough money to do this vision. So here's what I have found out in my time as minister of Light in the Mountains. you have to ask yourself each and every day, why are we here and how can we do that today? It's interesting just talking about simple money. So in 2008, we had the big recession, we call it. I could see the panic on the look of our congregation. Like I said, their 401ks turned into 40Ks, like overnight. And of course, our finances went down. And I can honestly tell you that I have no clue how we made it through financially at that time. But each and every day, I got up and said, what is our work as a spiritual community? What is my job as the leader of this spiritual community? How do we double down and do that with more excitement and fervor each and every day? And again, I have no idea how our bills got paid. And there was no like angel that wrote us a big check. It wasn't like, we always have that dream, don't you? Like the huge donor. They died and left you X amount of dollars. It didn't happen for us. We had to get up each and every day and say, why are we here? And to just keep on doing it. And the other part of that in the release was to say that as we are looking for our highest vision to do what we're doing right now, to also realize that there is a certain point in the desert that sometimes the answer is that you're done. That you need to stop holding on to what was and that you're done. And so we just continually have lived in the moment of saying, what is our work here today? So let me just tell you another story about our history before I came. So when I came to Light on the Mountains, it had been a spiritual community for about 15 years. And they had done what many communities do. You know, they kind of made their way from hotel to hotel and in our little valley, and attendance would go up and it would go down. And the biggest work that the community did actually was constantly looking for a minister. And people would come and they'd tell them, you know, we really can't pay you that much, but boy, with you here, it'll be so great and it'll grow so much that we'll just be able to pay you all sorts of money once you grow the community better. And then they'd cycle out a few months later. And then supposedly a really bad thing happened, which turned out to be the most amazing thing. So our congregation split into two. And that portion that was still called Light of the Mountains really had some time in the desert. Really had to ask themselves, are we done? Are we finished? Can we pat ourselves on the back and say we did good work? And in discernment, they came to, or should I say guided to, some conclusions. One, they weren't done. And two, it really is true that if you keep doing the same thing over and over again, you really will get the same results. And so they begin to think, how can we do this differently? And of course, with them, like so many communities, there was this idea, like in the third false belief, that when the right person shows up, as in the correct minister, or he or she will just lead us to great heights of things. Or, of course, the idea of there being that magical big donor. And they realize, you know, that old saying is that we have been the ones we're waiting for. I figured nobody else is really eager to fund our spiritual community, so I guess we have to do it. And so after much discernment, they really dug deep. And they decided for the first time to fund a full-time salary for a minister for the first time in 15 years. They also, and this sounds really crazy, they decided to buy property. And it wasn't a matter of trying to find the right person to fund it, or to fill out grants, or to do yard sales, or bake sales. They decided, no one else is going to fund this if we're not willing to fund this. And so we bought a building. And about that time, my resume passed their desk. So has it been really one happy ending story since then? Absolutely not. There are some days that I have this fantasy saying that I'm going to drive to the airport and get on the first plane and I don't care where I go to. Of course, the irony of that is most of them come to Salt Lake. Well, but I'm saying it kind of kills that fantasy a little bit. Oh, I'll get on a plane to Hawaii or to Thailand. No, actually, you're going to Salt Lake. Nothing wrong with that, but I said it does kill the fantasy a little bit. And like I said, there are moments that it just challenges me to the core. And there are moments that I feel so connected and elated with what I'm doing that I can't imagine it ever ending. It's just how life works. It's how spiritual community works. But the trick is to really get clear on what your work in the world is to do. It's funny, when we say this in spiritual community, we often think we need a 3-point plan. Maybe a soup kitchen, or whatever. And you might do things like that. But it is much simpler, and in some ways, much more difficult. I don't know if you've noticed, but I think this is one of the most difficult times in our country's history in a long time. And I'm not pointing a finger at any particular ideology or political figure. We are sharing this together. What might be your job right now? Not as only individuals, but as spiritual communities. Part of the Centers for Spiritual Living mission statement is to say that not only do we make the world a better place, but we create a world where people realize their spiritual magnificence. Doesn't that sound nice? But what does that really mean? No, really, it sounds lovely, doesn't it? You could put it on a card and hand it to people. We are about seeing your spiritual magnificence. It's the most difficult work there is in this world. It's easy to turn to your neighbor right now, I'm not telling you to do that, and say, I see your spiritual magnificence. We've met before, we've shared coffee. We all got up on a Sunday morning to share something together. The most difficult then is to see it in those with whom you do not agree. The most difficult thing is to see it on the political figure of either party with whom you want to throw the shoe at on the TV set. That your job, and I know our job at Light of the Mountains, is to be representatives of that understanding that the presence of the divine is within all things, even when we have trouble seeing it. That, what as Mother Teresa said, that, how do you do this work? She says, well, I just see everyone, the face of the Christ, in its most unlikely disguise. That's what we're doing right now. So if you want to figure out what your next step is as a community, that's where you start. Look at something like that unites you. That it's not just about coming together on a Sunday morning or an amazing concert at night. It's saying that we have a relevancy in this world and a reason to be here, and that we're going to live it each and every day. So the question is, how do we start? So I'm just going to start with just tell you how we're going to end up here. Just a brief process, and when I'm done, then I'll transition into our prayer where you can come up for the practitioners. So we're just going to have a seamless thing here, and I'll tell you when you call the practitioners up. But let's just close our eyes for a moment. So we ask ourselves, what is our work to do, and how in the world do we go about it? So I'm not asking you right now to come up with a picture of what that needs to be, or how that needs to look, or what you physically are supposed to do as individuals and as a group in your community. I invite you to bring up that feeling, that emotional feeling and sensation of what it feels like to know you are already doing your work in the world. Again, don't put a label on it. What does it feel like that you can tell your friends and family that the Salt Lake Center for Spiritual Living is a dynamic part of the Salt Lake community doing significant work in the world? What does that feel like? And imagine yourself as you get up each and every day that everything you do is an extension of that larger work. And you just can't wait to get to it because you know that as whatever you do, that you are seeing the presence of the divine in everything. What does that feel like? And bring to mind anything that you think needs to be healed within yourself, your community, within the world. And what does it feel like knowing that that is already healed and done? So as you go through your period of discernment, both as individuals and as a collective, your homework is to, multiple times a day, come back to this feeling. This isn't just a one-off thing. Your spiritual practice is to keep bringing back this feeling of it is done, it is complete, we are relevant, we are helping heal the world. And as you invoke that feeling, you'll be led to know what the actual work is that you're to do. So as we go into treatment right now, the practitioners can come forward. And know absolutely that the presence of the divine is right where we are. We push aside our humanness that tells us otherwise. And we know that at a cellular level, that in a sense, God is all there is. Spirit is all there is. That there is completeness in this universe that is represented within everything. And here's the amazing thing. It includes us. It includes me. It includes each person here. That in our smallness, we try to say that it includes everything but us. But today we declare that it also includes us as well. That presence of the divine is right where we are, right where we stand. With all our faults, with all our warts, with all the mistakes we ever made, it doesn't matter. The presence of the divine is right here where we are, doing and having its being as me, as each one of you right here today. And there is absolutely nothing that can take that away from any of us. And so in that realization, we speak a message of truth. Not something that we want to happen, but something we know is already within the mind of spirit. And you can come forth to our practitioners today and share that with them. Now, each of you who chose not to come up today, just bring something up within your consciousness. Something now that you're ready to let go and put behind you. And know that it was never the truth of who you are anyway. That it was an illusion, that it was something that you took on for God knows what reason. But it's time to declare your independence and say that it is done. I accept the divinity within me, and I put it behind me now. And I open myself to live the God presence that I know that I have always been. And in this, we simply give thanks. We don't give thanks necessarily for receiving something, but we are thankful because it has always been right there before us and within us. And within this consciousness of thanksgiving, we let go on so many levels. We let go this thought into the creative medium, the law of mind, knowing that it is created in spite of our sense sometimes of a smaller self. But we release also any idea of holding on to the past, any idea of how it should be or has been. And this letting go is to just be present right where we are. And we affirm together, and so it is.